Welcome to Talks with Tracy, with certified hypnotherapist, life coach, and licensed mental health professional, Tracy Claremont. Tracy will share her healing journey and explore the many meaningful alternative healing methods in our world today that will support you in doing your own deepest emotional healing. So please welcome the host of Talks with Tracy, Tracy Claremont. Let the suffering end and the healing begin.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Talks with Tracy. I'm your host, Tracy Claremont, coming to you live on the Bold Brave Television Network. Thank you so much for joining me today. As always, I appreciate everyone who takes the time to listen to the show. And also, thank you, Bold Brave Television Network, for having me. So now I have been spending a lot of time lately talking about the importance of basically taking care of our emotional selves so that we can be our brightest, most authentic and healthiest version of ourselves. In fact, I talk about that all the time. That is something that is the goal, to inspire transformation and healing, to reach those most optimal versions of ourselves. So all of this is, again, for the purpose of inspiring listeners to do that deep dive inward into their emotional experience for the sake of healing emotional wounds. And actually, correction, not just for the sake of healing emotional wounds, although that is immensely important and it's a very important step on this journey, but to actually transform our lives, reaching fulfillment, living our best life, living our healthiest mental, physical, emotional, spiritual version of ourselves, reaching our fullest potential. So one of the greatest hurdles that many of us must overcome in the quest for fulfillment, in the quest for transformation, and our journey of transformation, is shame. So what is shame? Shame is a feeling like any other feeling. It's just like anger, sadness, joy, excitement. But, it's just so powerful. So why? Why does it become so powerful? How can shame threaten to destroy our lives? How can it have that kind of power? How can it be in the driver's seat? How can it lead us down roads of self-destruction? So, did you know that shame is the basis for all addictive behaviors? Did you know that? Whether it's an addiction to substances, eating, shopping, toxic relationships, sex, smoking, whatever, it all finds its basis in toxic shame. So the answer to that question, how can it be such a powerful destructive force in our lives, is what I'm going to be talking about today, when shame moves from a healthy human feeling to a toxic internalized experience. Internalized to the point where it becomes part of our identity, to the point that where a person becomes shame-based. Now that is an incredibly painful place to be, way to live. So how does this develop? What are the devastating consequences of it? This is so important to understand, because without a healthy sense of shame, when shame becomes toxic, we're simply unable to be who we truly are. It completely circumvents our ability to be our true selves. It causes us to develop beliefs about ourselves that are untrue, that are lies about ourselves, that we then go forward and live our life within. So this makes it a very important issue to resolve in our quest to transform our lives. In fact, without resolving toxic shame, we will never be able to reach that state of true authenticity. Shame is one of the most powerful forces to suppress who we truly are. In fact, toxic shame, when we experience it, we develop defenses, we develop unhealthy coping strategies, we develop lies about ourselves, beliefs about ourselves that are not true. We're just simply not able to be the whole people that we are meant to be. So yes, it's an all-important issue to bring light upon, so we can make choices about our personal healing journey, To heal, we must bravely go into these dark corners, into these deep, dark crevices of our emotional experience, and we have to bring light to those spaces so as to heal them. The only way out is through. It's just like when I spoke about healing from grief, I think it was episode 47, I think. The only way to heal from grief is to move through it, to feel it. Healing from toxic shame is much the same. Yes, it'll be uncomfortable. Yes, it may be painful, but the rewards of freeing yourself from toxic shame are immeasurable. They are never ending. So it's very important work to do. So today I'm going to talk about how our sense of shame is developed in the first place, what healthy shame is, and of course, what toxic shame is. I'm also going to talk about the havoc that toxic shame can wreak on our lives when it's not healed. And I'm going to share some examples from my own life, from the life of others, the lives of others along the way in this discussion. All right, so now, as you may have guessed, this is yet another discussion of early childhood experiences, because where do we develop our sense of shame? It's in our childhood. It all begins with our experience in childhood through relationship. A relationship is the bridge that is required first to develop our sense of trust with others, and secondly to then develop a sense of shame. So upon our foundation of trust, we build our sense of shame. So we all come into this world beautiful, sparkling love and light. I've said that so many times, and we're the very definition of innocence, self-worth. True love for ourselves is our birthright. True self-esteem. Who doesn't light up when they see a little baby? Then when they walk into a room and there's a little baby, I mean, that baby could have food all over their face, and you'll just look at them and beam, and they'll be beaming back. That's they're full of spontaneity and creativity, wonder, enthusiasm, completely precious, right? Well, every single one of us was that baby, and all of that is still who we truly are. But then what happens as we gain life experience? How can a child who is so full of self-worth and confidence and importance, suddenly become, or at a certain point, become shame-based? How can they go from that to a shame-based identity where they believe that they are inherently flawed and defective in their core? It's really tragic, and it happens to so many of us. So let's just begin by talking about how a healthy sense of shame is developed. Now, to do this, we need to just back up a little bit to the very first developmental stage that a human goes through, and that is involves the development of trust. Like I said, you develop a foundation of trust upon which to build the other emotional experiences around. And that is the process of getting your basic needs met. This is typically between birth to 18 months or so. Erickson calls this the infancy stage. So, upon birth, we develop the development of trust happens via relationship experience. Just a little side note, next week, I'm going to have an amazing guest on who is an international expert on attachment. So we're going to talk about attachment, and he's going to share with us. His name's Dr. Neil Boris. I can't wait for that. Anyway, trust. Trust is based upon a child's experience with their primary caretaker or caretakers. Simply put, it's the child's need. If the child's needs are routinely and meaningfully met by a caretaker, when the need is expressed, the child will develop a sense of trust that the world is friendly, that their needs will be met, that they're important to others, that they matter, that the world is safe, a safe place to be, that they will be kept safe in this world. That caretaker will be there for them. The relationships won't disappoint them. They won't fail them. They won't betray them. All of that is established in that first stage of life. Now, I do add the word meaningfully met, and this is just a reminder that these interactions are actually about quality human connection. So now I would argue that, if you fill up a bottle and you lay your baby down and you put that bottle in their mouth and you prop that bottle with a pillow and then you leave, that is not meaningfully meeting your child's needs. They need connection. They need to be held. They need to look into your eyes. They need to be talked to. They need to be able to touch you. All of those things make it a meaningful experience and trust building experience. So I'm not saying that you have to get it 100% right every single time. I know I've had moments when I was raising babies where I had to prop that bottle and go tend to something else. But the majority of the time, you want to meet your child's needs in a meaningful way. So overall, that's kind of a simplified description of trust. How trust is developed in early childhood is the quality and consistency of caretaker interactions that lay the foundation for future social and emotional development. So once a sense of trust is developed, then the child can move on to the next phase of healthy development, and they can develop a healthy sense of shame. So there has to be that interpersonal bridge, again, a bridge between the child and the caretaker for shame to be developed, because there has to be relationship. There has to be a desire um, to not please somebody, but to be okay with somebody else. So let me explain this a little better. So say you're in traffic and you cut somebody off by accident, of course. And that person that you cut off, they're like hanging out their window and they're yelling at you and they're flipping you off and all this kind of stuff. Well, you might be reactive, you might get angry back, but that interaction isn't likely to take you to a deep place of shame, right? Because that person doesn't matter to you. I mean, they're just a stranger. You don't really care about them. But if that happened where your mom or your dad was upset with you, was yelling at you, was degrading you, well, that's a whole different experience, right? That likely can take you to a place of deep shame. It can ignite your shame. So that shame is developed in the context of relationship. So it is actually developed in the second developmental stage, which is often referred to as toddlerhood. Oh my gosh, this is between ages 1 and 3. Isn't this a great time? Toddlerhood. It's beautiful and it's challenging all at the same time. This is when your beautiful child is developing a sense of autonomy. And this is where they begin to say no, sometimes forcefully, sometimes followed by tantrums. And this is where a parent begins to say, no, no, no. Your child has incredibly poor judgment. Um, they lack life experience, right? Well, you as a parent, you have lots of life experience. So you're, repeatedly behind them, kind of thwarting off catastrophes, right? You're like keeping the table from tipping over on them, or the chair, or, you're keeping the worm from going in their mouth, or you're keeping them from trying to like pull the ear off the dog. All of these kind of things. It's a time where you're like, no, no, no. And, I can remember when my now 26-year-old daughter was 3 years old. And we were out in public and this kind stranger asked her what her name was. So she looked at me to get permission. Like, is this safe? That's a sign of healthy attachment. And I gave her the nonverbal, okay, yes, you can tell this person your name. And she looked at this person and you know what she said? She said her name was Rosa No-No. Oh my gosh, I had said Rosa No-No so many times during the stage, she thought it was her name. It's embarrassing. Anyway, so in this stage, they're separating, they're testing. It's a critical stage in which it's very important that you not shame them. In this stage where they're learning that they can say no, if they're continually shamed and told that they are not allowed to say no, this can cause very serious problems for them as they move on. And it's a complicated time. It's a time when that can be frustrating for parents. We're expected to stay calm and accepting even in the face of tantrums. It's really hard. So if you think about potty training, how confusing is potty training for a child during this stage? I mean, they're expected to learn to control their muscles in this stage. And, they're like praised and rewarded. And then, like, then they're told, oh no, that's not right. Don't do that. So They have to figure out like when to contract and hold something in and when to let loose and let it flow, right? Super confusing. Sometimes they get rewarded for holding it, right? Like when you're in the middle of Walmart or something, and sometimes they get punished or scolded for holding it, like when they're sitting on the potty. And then sometimes they're rewarded for letting it loose, like when they're on the potty. And then sometimes they're punished for letting it loose, like when they're in the shopping cart at Walmart. So, I mean, it's super confusing, and it's the parents' job. It's our parents' job, to provide structure and discipline within reason, right? While not making our child feel like they are inherently defective. It's super tricky. So you don't want to shame in these moments. You don't want to be overly lenient, and you don't want to be overly punitive, and it's frustrating. And you have to do all of this while remaining calm, because you are, in fact, the person who is teaching your child to regulate emotion on top of everything else. So it's tricky, parenting. It's the toughest job that you'll ever do, and it comes with little to no training. So it's also a job that, we repeatedly feel like we're failing at, even when we're doing a good job. Again, don't have to get it right 100% of the time. So John Bradshaw, he was a counselor, an author, a theologian, a public speaker. He passed away now. He passed away in 2016. I really like listening to him and hearing his work. He gave presentations and had things like on PBS and things like that. But one of the things that he talked about was this topic of shame. And he said, and I quote, "Parenting is a 30-year commitment of altruism." And this is so true. Altruism it's defined as selfless concern for another. And that's really what parenting is, right? 30 years of altruism. Altruism. So difficult and great at the same time. So it is time to take a brief commercial break. When I come back, I'm going to be talking about toxic shame. And we're going to dive into that. But first, we're going to take a brief commercial break. You are watching Talks with Tracy on Bold Brave Television Network. We will be right back.
What if there were a super tiny device that could diagnose the brain and is smaller than a single human hair? What if you could see inside the brain to help an epilepsy patient during surgery or to help the fight against Parkinson's disease? Dr. Patricia Broderick is proud to announce the Broderick Probe, a biomedical and electronic breakthrough. Imagine a probe to help with the understanding and potential cure of brain-related diseases. To learn more, listen live to the Easy Sense radio show with host Dr. Broderick, Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network. And to help support the Broderick Foundation, please go to easysense.com and learn how, with your help, we can fight these horrific brain disorders. That's easysense.com to learn more and help support the Broderick Foundation. Author, radio show host, and coach John M. Hawkins reveals strategies to help gain perspective, build confidence, find clarity, achieve goals. John M. Hawkins' new book, Coached to Greatness, Unlock Your Full Potential with Limitless Growth, published by iUniverse. Hawkins reveals strategies to help readers accomplish more. He believes the book can coach them to greatness. Hawkins says that the best athletes get to the top of their sport with the help of coaches, mentors, and others. He shares guidance that helps readers reflect on what motivates them, rediscover and assess their core values, philosophies, and competencies, find settings that allow them to be the most productive, and track their progress towards accomplishing goals. Listen to John Hawkins' My Strategy, Saturdays, 1 p.m. Eastern on the BBM Global Network and TuneIn Radio.
Welcome back to Talks with Tracy, coming to you live on the Bold Brave Television Network. I'm talking about shame today, specifically. I'm going to get into toxic shame now. So, healthy shame is a natural and adaptive emotion that helps us to recognize our limits and have good boundaries. It acts as a moral compass, guiding our behavior, and in its healthy state, it fosters empathy and compassion for others. A person who has a healthy sense of shame is able to self reflect, hold themselves accountable to grow from their experiences. And the opposite is true for unhealthy shame. So, for example, if you were to say something that hurts somebody's feelings, if you have healthy shame, you'll be motivated to apologize and to make amends for that. It's highly constructive. Now, on the other hand, is toxic shame. Toxic shame is just the opposite. It is destructive. It's very pervasive in our culture, in our society. It's widespread in people everywhere, and I would consider it an epidemic in our culture, as does Brené Brown. So no discussion regarding shame would be complete without including the work of Brené Brown. She's right up there with Oprah for me. I love her. Brené Brown is a researcher, an author, a public speaker who has dedicated much of her career to the exploration and the study of shame and vulnerability. She's super amazing. Now, Brené Brown, she defines toxic shame as being the intensely painful feeling of believing that we are flawed and defective, unworthy of love and belonging. So she makes a distinction between shame and guilt. She says that guilt is associated with feeling bad about our actions. That's a healthy thing when our actions are not great. But toxic shame is feeling bad about ourselves, which is a very unhealthy thing. And I mean, just shame is okay to feel a little bit bad about ourselves as long as we don't go into a deep pit. Now, she describes toxic shame as a corrosive emotion that leaves us feeling isolated and worthless. Not good. So, this is where negative thoughts about ourselves, negative beliefs, false beliefs are created, self loathing, self hatred. All of that is internalized. So, shame moves from a feeling to being a toxic state of being. And this is referred to as having a shame based identity. The state of being is so painful that people fall into dysfunctional behaviors like addictions. They develop a false sense of themselves. They develop lies about themselves that are just super painful. They turn away from their authentic selves and they go into really dysfunctional behaviors. Chronic people pleasing is one of those behaviors. But we're not the whole people that we're meant to be when we are shame based in our identity. Now, this toxic shame, it typically begins in childhood and is developed through experiences in relationship with primary caretakers. Now, not always, but most often. And I'll be focused on toxic shame being developed in childhood today, but I do want to mention other ways as well. So, John Bradshaw, again, he actually identifies several sources of toxic shame. So, number one is childhood trauma. This is, of course, experiences of abuse, neglect, abandonment. Number two is also related to childhood experiences, and that is family dynamics. Dysfunctional family relationships, like where children are constantly criticized, compared to others, made to feel like they're worthless, like they are less than, like they can't do anything right. And number three is societal and cultural influences, where societal expectations and cultural norms impose unrealistic standards of perfection that create feelings of inadequacy, that not good enough identity or part of ourselves. That creates toxic shame. So I was listening to Brené Brown the other day. It was a TED Talk from years and years ago. And she referred to this study done at Boston College. And this was many years ago. But in this study, they took a group of people and they asked them, what do women need to do to conform to female norms in our country? Do you know what the top answers were? Oh my gosh. They were be nice, be thin, be modest, and use all available resources for appearance. Oh my gosh, isn't that awful? That's an example of societal expectations and cultural norms creating toxic shame. And I would argue, and I mean, I think it's a no-brainer actually, that our children and young adults today are under constant attack in this regard, much more so than when I was a kid or a young adult with all of the social media exposure today. So, but that can create toxic shame, those unreasonable expectations. So in this study, they asked that same group about men. So what do men in this country have to do to conform to male norms? And the answers were equally as awful. The top responses were show emotional control, work first, pursue status, and violence, perpetrate violence. Oh my gosh, that is just awful. Those norms are awful. Anyway, that's a whole nother show. I don't want to get off track, so I'm going to bounce right back. So we teach our children either healthy shame or toxic shame through our relationship with them. To teach our children healthy shame, we have to give them permission to be human. Oh my gosh, all humans make mistakes. It's okay. Mistakes can be our greatest teachers. I've learned from endless mistakes in my own life. You know, families need to have a rule that mistakes are allowed to be made, rather than that rule that mistakes are unacceptable and will be punished. We kind of have it all backwards in our family systems these days. We need to have the opposite of perfectionism. Living in the context of perfectionism is living without grace. And that is harsh and rigid and abusive. So I've worked with so many parents who bring their children to therapy so I can fix them. You know, they want to like drop them off at 10 a.m., pick them up at 11 a.m., and all these issues, behaviors that they have identified need to be cleared up in therapy. All right, so that doesn't work that way. And you know why it doesn't work? Because our children are not inherently defective. That's not the issue. It's a systems, it's a relationship issue. So, you know, when I never work with kids, or I rarely, maybe in some circumstances, like when a child is in foster care or something like that. But I don't like to work with children if families aren't included, if caretakers aren't included, because it really is within this dynamic that the resolution lies, and you know, shifts in relationship and shifts in connection that need to happen. So that can be a tough pill to swallow for some parents. And you know, when I have those very serious conversations with parents about how they are the key to their children's emotional health. Sometimes this is a time in therapy where suddenly a parent isn't able to bring their kid anymore. You know, they're just way too busy. Um, and I always know that that is the parent's own shame that has been ignited, even though I try to do it in a kind way. But their own shame has been ignited, and it's too painful for them to really face and to hold the fact that they are now doing the shaming that was done to them. And they are now creating within their children this feeling of being inherently defective, like they feel in themselves. And sometimes that's just too painful. Um, and I understand that that is a painful thing to sit with. I sit with children all the time who will express to me that they really feel like they are inherently awful humans, like they're terrible people. How painful is that? And, you know, I've sat with many teenagers um, who have such a toxic shame base and such a low sense of self. It has just created so much anxiety and depression and self-loathing within themselves. And when I tell them, you know, they are truly pure love and light, just as innocent as the day they were born. They are that. They're created out of Creator's love. I see tears just roll down their face. That's toxic shame in motion. You know, they've First off, they've never been told that before. And secondly, they don't feel that. They feel something completely different in their core. And that's kind of where we start to open that up. So, some parents are just out of balance. John Bradshaw talks about two great errors in parenting that people make. They either hold their babies too close to them and, do everything for them, or they go to the other extreme and they just let them go. Neither one is healthy. There needs to be a balance. One grows up, one says, don't grow up because I need you to stay close to me so that I can feel valued and loved. That's very unhealthy. That's a shame-based parent. And the other one is equally as bad, where it's saying, hurry up and grow up because I don't want to take care of you. I can't tolerate your need all the time. And that's also a shame-based parent. So we need a healthy balance. So both cause serious emotional issues for children. And then, they grow up and they take these issues into their adulthood. So also toxic shame is multi-generational, meaning it's passed down from one generation to the next. It's via alcoholism, abandonment, emotional abuse, on and on and on. Multi-generational behavior patterns. Shame, it's about secrecy. I love John Bradshaw's description when he says, and I quote him in this talk that he gave, if you are shame-based, it's as though there's a hunter that is always coming, and they're gonna find out. They're gonna find out that I am flawed and defective. I am not what I look like I am. The hunter is coming. Now, I love this quote because it makes me think of my husband. My husband, he comes from a childhood experience of abuse. He was physically beaten by his father. He was repeatedly degraded, emotionally abused. He was made to feel responsible for all of his dad's problems and the family problems even. He was always trying to gain his dad's good favor, and he just was never able to do that. Now, he also looked the most like his dad, so I think that had something to do with it. Maybe his dad was transferring his self-hatred onto him, projecting that self-hatred onto my husband. And, his dad was an alcoholic, so he medicated with substances. And then when my husband was 18 years old, his dad committed suicide. Now, I remember when I first met back up with my husband after years of not seeing him, not being around him, I said, you're such a nice person, because that's what I saw. He greeted people, he smiled, he helped anyone with anything, even perfect strangers. And I remember in that moment, he looked at me and he said, no, I'm not. I'm an asshole. And I was like, really? Wow. Okay. But now that I think about it, that was his toxic shame speaking. I was the hunter in that moment. I was coming for him, and I was inevitably going to find out that he was flawed and defective. So he was just going to save me some time, tell me right up front who he was. Now, I also think that was an effort to keep me away, to protect himself. I was getting too close, but anyway, it didn't work. I prevailed. Not that it was not without hardships, because when you are a shame-based person and find yourself in a healthy relationship, you'll do things to sabotage, because your core belief is that you don't deserve this, that you're unlovable, you're not worthy. And those moments are difficult. They require a lot of kindness and compassion and patience. It's developing trust. You have to develop trust in that relationship. That allows for vulnerability. And shame-based people have a lot of trouble being vulnerable. Okay, it's about loving yourself and going to that place. So it is already time to take another commercial break. But when I come back, I'm going to talk more, give some more examples of how this toxic shame plays itself out in lives. And we're going to also talk about how we can resolve toxic shame issues. So please stay tuned for that. You're watching Talks with Tracy on Bold Brave Television Network. I'll be right back.
Did you know that your beliefs create your entire reality, but it's the subconscious beliefs that do most of the creating? Belief shifter and life coach Shiraz can help you identify those limiting beliefs and eliminate them, often in a single session.
Like it was almost instant, like I had relief right away.
Creating better health, relationships, careers, and finances. Let Shiraz help you step out of safety and into awareness.
Definitely something's happening. It's like a flow inside. It feels good.
Whether in person or online, Shiraz provides personal coaching, belief shifting. Visit Shiraz at energeticmagic.com or call 416-529-7429. Energetic Magic on the BBM Global Network, Tuesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern. Find your greater happiness. Be well. Be aware. Be magical.
Are you struggling to care for elderly parents or a spouse? Do you wonder if being a caregiver is making you sick? Are you worried about taking time off work to care for elderly parents and balance work, life, and caregiving? Has caregiving become exhausting and emotionally draining? Are you an aging adult who wants to remain independent but you're not sure how? I'm Pamela D. Wilson. Join me for the Caring Generation radio show for caregivers and aging adults, Wednesday evenings, 6 Pacific, 7 Mountain, 8 Central, and 9 Eastern, where I answer these questions and share tips for managing stress, family relationships, health, well-being, and more. Podcasts and transcripts of the Caring Generation are on my website, PamelaDWilson.com, plus my caregiving library, online caregiver support programs, and programs for corporations interested in supporting working caregivers. Help, hope, and support for caregivers is here on the Caring Generation and PamelaDWilson.com.
Hello and welcome back to Talks with Tracy. Coming to you live on the Bold Brave Television Network. Thank you so much for joining me once again. So I'm talking about shame, toxic shame. In particular, toxic shame is the intensely painful feeling of believing that we're flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. Healthy shame is a feeling, while toxic shame is internalized to the point that it becomes our identity. It's no longer a feeling, it's a way of being. Now, I was talking about parenting before the break, and toxic shame, it is a lack of self-love. And as parents, we are there to love our children and teach our children to love themselves. Well, how can we do that if we live from a basis of toxic shame and a lack of love for ourselves? How do we teach our children to love themselves when we don't love ourselves? So again, this work is really important to do, to go into that emotional experience and bring light to it for the sake of healing and transforming. So I have said that toxic shame comes from many different kinds of experiences: physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, having overly critical parents, just to name a few. I do want to touch on abandonment just for a moment. Abandonment in childhood, it doesn't have to mean that your parent leaves and never comes back, is never seen again. That is abandonment for sure. But there's lots of different ways that we can abandon our children. So to develop a healthy sense of self, a healthy sense of worthwhileness, a sense that we are important, that we matter, that again is the foundation of trust and healthy shame. A child needs time and attention. They need guidance, direction. They need somebody to be interested in them, a caretaker to be interested in them. They need guidance and direction that's not degrading. And, when they get a parent's time and attention, they feel loved. So the parent who is in the home but has no time for their child and pays no attention to them, that is a form of abandonment. The parent who's there but repeatedly tells the child to go away or go find something to do, is irritated when their child comes to them, that's a form of abandonment. Now, they're just not there for them in a meaningful way. Another way of abandoning your child is role reversal, when the child is expected to meet the emotional needs of the parent rather than the parent expecting, or the parent meeting the emotional needs of the child. That's another way that we can abandon our children. That's the parent that says, "Did you miss me today? Did you think about me?" when the child was just at school. It's like, come on. Anyway, Narcissistic parenting, that's also a way of abandoning your child. Again, when the child is expected to meet your need, then rather than you meeting their need. When a child's behavior, a parent takes their child's behavior as a reflection of them. So if their behavior is bad, there's hell to pay. All of that is a way of abandoning your child as far as emotional needs go. So I just wanted to mention that, different ways of abandonment. So did you know that any kind of abuse will shame a child? Physical abuse, of course, very common. John Bradshaw, I like the way he points out that there is not one speck of scientific research data that shows that physically harming a child is helpful to them. There's like not one speck of evidence. It's really just parenting through fear, trying to have control through fear. Emotional abuse, extremely harmful. Yelling, screaming, degrading, devaluing, blaming, criticizing, comparing, expecting perfection, all of that is emotionally abusive. Sexual abuse, of course, and it's awful. In my opinion, it's among the most severely shaming. Sexual abuse, and other abuses too, but maybe sexual abuse more so. It causes a person to suppress their feelings and live in true secrecy. And those are very harmful, very shame-based kind of ways. So one of the biggest setups for eating disorders is incest. So, and this is like sexual abuse to any degree, from the dad who's kind of peeping in on their daughter as they're changing, all the way to, full-on forced intercourse. Any degree of sexual abuse is extremely harmful. And it also is one of the biggest family secrets, right? Okay, remember, so shame is about keeping secrets. Maybe secrets about ourselves, secrets about our past. We become isolated, we suppress our feelings for the sake of survival. So also, did you know that when a child is in a dysfunctional family, the most painful times come when a child is the most needy? When you have a shame-based parent, when you get needy, what do? They get angry. So they can't tolerate need. They get angry. They start accusing a child of manipulating. Like, you shouldn't feel like that. Don't feel that way. You're just trying to get your way. So it's not safe to be vulnerable and express a need. And instead, this can create a lot of behaviors that are undesirable to a parent because their children's needs aren't being met and they're going to a place of shame. So, children, developmentally, this is appropriate for them to be pretty narcissistic. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean that they take on everything as their own responsibility. They think great things that happen are a result of them, and bad things that happen are a result of them as well. They're a bit narcissistic in that way, and that's developmentally appropriate. So they'll take responsibility for abuse that happens to them. They'll feel like they are bad. They'll take responsibility for divorce that happens. If they had been a better kid, their parents would still be together. They do this all the time, even when we try to help them understand that it doesn't have anything to do with them. So children who have been traumatized especially take responsibility for awful things that happen to them. So I have a story from a viewer who was reflecting on her own childhood trauma. She is in this process of transformation, this beautiful transformation, and she's doing that deep dive inward into her dark crevices and emotional experience, and she's bringing light to that and doing the transformation, the healing. I respect her for that. So she gave me permission to share this story. All right, so this happened when she was 8 years old. Her mother was in an abusive relationship. So one day she was playing in this room. There was a box with an umbrella on it. And she grabbed the umbrella and she was playing with it. She accidentally pushed that little button that pops the umbrella open. And the other girl who was in the room said, now someone's going to die because you opened that in the house. So she quickly closed that. and she put it away. Well, and then days later, weeks later, her mom was going to go visit family in another town. So she told her that she was going to go visit family, that she was going to leave her with her partner, leave this little girl with her partner. Well, the girl wasn't comfortable with this, and she said, I don't want you to go, Mom. And she said, well, why not? And she said, because so-and-so's mean to me. And then her mom started questioning her, and that little girl started to backpedal a little bit and close down because she realized that maybe she said too much. She didn't want to start a fight between them. And, they had a toxic, volatile relationship. So she closed down. She stopped talking. And her mom sent her to her room to bed. So the next thing that this 8-year-old girl heard was somebody go into the closet. And then she heard 2 gunshots fired. And the next thing you know, her auntie was coming into the room and scooping her up, bringing her out of the apartment and trying to shield her from seeing her mom. And she went to her uncle's house and she was told, your mom's gone. She didn't really know what that meant at the time, but she came to find out that her mom had died. Her mom had been shot. So this is a heavy story. This is serious trauma. This is absolutely the makings of toxic shame. But she shared with me what her beliefs were from that experience. And first belief was, I should have never opened that umbrella. If I hadn't opened that umbrella, my mom would still be alive. This is really typical for child thinking. Next thought was, I shouldn't have told my mom that so-and-so was mean. If I hadn't, she wouldn't have confronted her and she wouldn't have got shot. So all of these beliefs, these lies about ourselves are being, they're developed through that trauma. I'm unworthy. Nobody wants me. I caused people to die. I killed my mom. I mean, really, those are very heavy things to carry. And then we end up, carrying those with us. We develop lies about ourselves, about who we truly are and our value, our worth, our lovableness. And we carry that into our lives. And we have, behaviors as a result and relationships as a result that are just not healthy. When truly this person is just true love and light, complete innocence and all of that. So I appreciate that I was allowed to share that story. It's a super heavy story, but these are things that genuinely happen, truly happen to people. And just want to give props for that, for that viewer's journey and transformation. Incredibly brave to go into those dark crevices and those dark spaces in our emotional experience. And I'm just going to take a moment and send some unconditional love and acceptance to her adult self. Did you know that you can actually focus on sending an energy of unconditional love and acceptance to people and it will be received? So practice that. Do that once in a while for other people. I love that. Okay, so heavy story. Let's talk about some effects of toxic shame. So one very serious effect of toxic shame that comes from the result of trauma can be addiction. Now this means addictions to anything: substances, shopping, eating, gambling, unhealthy relationships, work, cigarettes, vaping, whatever. Dr. Gabor Mate defines an addiction as a behavior, any behavior, substance related or not, that an individual pursues because they find pleasure, relief, or they crave it temporarily. They pursue it for the pleasure and relief despite negative consequences, and they don't give it up when there are negative consequences. So by this definition, he asks people, have you ever had an addictive behavioral pattern in your life? I have. And then he says, what did it do for you? What did you feel it did for you? And, the majority of people will say it provided relief for me. Well, it may relieve stress in the short run, but it creates more problems for you in the long run. So it's an unhealthy adaptation. So, addiction is really just an attempt to solve a problem, with that problem being emotional pain. And that's why it's so prevalent among people who experience toxic shame. Having a shame-based identity is an incredibly painful experience that, of course, we want to escape from. I can guarantee you my husband's dad had an incredibly toxic shame-based core belief within himself that created this life I can only imagine his childhood experience. And don't we all say, as parents, don't we all say that we do not want our children to grow up addicted to drugs and alcohol? We all say that. So if that's really true, that we don't want that, we must give our children the integrity of identity that will allow them to say no. Addiction is not, it's about not being able to say no, regardless of the consequences. And do you remember me talking about that developmental stage of autonomy? Well, this is where we begin to develop our ability to say no. We need to support our children in that. When children are abused or they're criticized or they're not allowed, when they're put in roles that are not appropriate for them, when they're degraded, when they're not allowed to make mistakes, they are not able to develop a healthy ability to say no. So they, in turn, develop unhealthy limits and they develop unhealthy boundaries. We have boundaries to protect ourselves. Countries have boundaries for protection. So can you imagine a country with no boundaries? Then anybody, anything, everything could come in. Well, we're no different as humans. Without boundaries, we allow anything and everything to come in. And a lot of that is unhealthy. So other effects of toxic shame, first, the obvious that I've been talking about: self-loathing, self-hatred, low self-esteem, viewing yourself as flawed and defective, feeling inferior. Of course, that interferes with personal and professional growth. Perfectionism. Now, this is an interesting one. This is where people attempt to compensate for those perceived flaws and defects related to their sense of self, the toxic shame. They become excessively perfectionistic, striving for standards that are unattainable, and always feeling that they have failed, like they just are never good enough. These are children who are intensely competitive, or they feel like they have to have straight A's, and if they get that A-, it's the end of the world. These kind of things, that perfectionism. Of course, relationship issues. I mentioned my own personal experience in relationship with my husband, given his toxic shame issues. And it's that pervasive sense of unworthiness that can lead to difficulty in forming and maintaining healthy relationships. So people struggle with trust. They struggle with being vulnerable, with being assertive, appropriately assertive in relationship, expressing their own needs, wants in relationships. This can create the chronic people-pleasing behaviors, and that is so incredibly unhealthy, and trying to be all things to all people so that you can be accepted. Never saying no, or never saying how you feel, because somebody might not like how you feel, so you just don't say it. Working so hard to prove that you are worthwhile. Saying yes to everything when saying yes causes you great stress. These are all ways that toxic shame plays itself out in relationships. So, of course, mental health issues, depression, anxiety, anger issues, self-harm behaviors, suicide, all based in toxic shame. And last but not least, of course, physical illness, diseases, cancers, because emotion not expressed will find its way out. I spoke about this a couple weeks ago when I shared information from Dr. Gabor Mate, who wrote the book When the Body Says No, and asks the question, what is your body saying no to that you didn't? I love that question. All right, so let's talk about healing now. So toxic shame, again, it involves secrecy, hiding who you truly are. So in order to recover, you must come out of hiding. That's why 12-step programs like Alcoholics Anonymous work for people. First, joining in sameness, which is incredibly healing. And then secondly, coming out of hiding. You say, my name is Fred and I'm an alcoholic. And you talk about your addiction and you receive support around that. So John Bradshaw refers to this great paradox. And that is, you have to embrace the pain in order to heal it. Yeah, so, I love Brene Brown, as I said, but there's a quote from Brene Brown. Now, she's referencing in this quote wording from James Hollis, who called shame the swampland of the soul. So this quote from Brene Brown says, James Hall is called shame, the swampland of the soul. And we're going to walk in, and the purpose is not to walk in and construct a home and live there. It's to put on some galoshes and walk through and find our way around. So we're going to go into that sludgy swampland of shame, and we're not going to set up house there. So many people set up house there and live there. That's unhealthy. What we're going to do, we're not going to set up house. We're going to put on some galoshes. We're going to go into that swampy yuckiness. We're going to look around. We're going to figure things out. We're going to make connections. We're going to release so that we don't have to live there anymore. Now we need to go to these dark places and bring light to them. It's the only way out is through. Brene Brown also says that empathy, that ability to understand and share the feelings of another, is the antidote to shame. And she says that if you put shame in a petri dish, it will grow exponentially if you give it 3 things, and that's secrecy, silence, and judgment. But if you put that same amount of shame in a petri dish and douse it with empathy, it can't survive. I believe that is talking about human connection, joining in sameness, having support from others. That's been the journey of myself and my husband together. Empathy, patience, kindness, and also having limits and boundaries. It's been a journey, and it's been good. It's hard for people who have toxic shame to be vulnerable, but it is a requirement to go to those places. So, recognizing and acknowledging the existence of toxic shame is an important first step to healing. Knowing the difference between healthy shame and toxic shame, and becoming aware of shame triggers, what's really going on. That's kind of walking through the swamp, figuring that out. This is how we move forward, examining our thoughts and feelings, our own experiences. John Bradshaw, he was well known for his work with inner child, doing inner child work. This is a process that I like to call doing the deep dive inward into your emotional experience, going back into your childhood, reconnecting with your wounded inner child. Hypnotherapy is great for this. It's kind of a fast track into your subconscious mind where those experiences, those memories exist, and then you can do healing around them. Now, mental health therapy is also good. It provides a safe space to explore and talk, address shame, learn some new coping skills and whatnot. And so that's great too. It's a slower process, but you kind of have to get past those conscious mind hurdles. It takes a while to build trust, but it's a very good thing. But most of all, and what I really want to impress upon everybody today and I want to encourage you to handle yourself with compassion, handle yourself with care, be kind to yourself. Treat yourself like you would treat your best friend who is being vulnerable and opening up to you. Delve into that experience of shame with compassion for yourself. Leave judgment behind. It is so unhealthy and unhelpful. Self-compassion, positive self-talk, setting realistic goals, allowing yourself to make mistakes, having appropriate boundaries, saying no to things that are too stressful for you to say yes to. Make yourself a priority. You deserve that, and it's okay to do that. I give you permission, full permission, and I take that advice myself. These are all ways to move forward in your healing process. And let's not forget the children. Develop a home environment that is full of acceptance and unconditional love. That doesn't mean let your children run all over and do whatever they want. That's not what that means. They still need guidance and structure and boundaries, but allow them to be children, allow them to make mistakes, differentiate between behavior and who they are. Offer grace, love them. Let them know that the greatest kids make poor choices. That's part of learning. And offer them unconditional love and acceptance. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening today. That was a lot. So, I appreciate everyone who takes the time to listen to the show. Next week, as I mentioned, I'm going to have the amazing Dr. Neil Boris on. He's going to teach us about attachment, and he's going to talk to us about how our own experiences influence our parenting. And I can't wait for that talk, so please join me for that. If you want to reach me, I can be reached at tcholistichealing.com. Go ahead and check out my website. I appreciate it. So until next time, this has been Talks with Tracy on Bold Brave Television Network. I'll see you next time.
This has been Talks with Tracy. Join us each week as Tracy and her guests will come together and realize that underneath it all, we are all the same and never alone. So join us each week and let Talks with Tracy be your safe place to land in your healing journey. Right here, Thursdays, 11 a.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network.